Science fiction and horror are two sides of the same interstellar coin, two grossly mutated peas in a pod. Rogue AI brothers from another cybernetic mother. You get the idea anyway. Basically, one loves scaring their audiences with terrifying scenarios, and the other loves scaring their audiences with terrifying scenarios just in space. Or with uncontrollable technology at the very least, if we're going to get specific. While it may be easy to put Halloween firmly under the horror banner at your local blockbuster, it may be a little more difficult to place something like Alien. And of course, there have been loads of other truly terrifying sci-fi films before and since. Since nothing is quite as blood-chilling as the thought of time hurtling ever onwards into the distant, unknowable realms of the future. Of course, for this peril, science fiction often steals the horror genre's trick of starting with a bang to really hammer home the fright of whatever alternate technological hellscape they're thrusting us into. So, hold on to your tinfoil hats, watchers, as we're going to look at the best. I am the android, Ash from What Culture, and these are the 10 scariest opening sci-fi movie scenes ever. 10. Cube. Director Vincenzo Natali's directorial debut pretty much defined how he makes movies, with each of his following films putting its audience in a state of discordance before unveiling the story. Cube opens with a Kafka-esque situation, as a bald man in what appears to be some sort of prison outfit awakens in an empty room with a hatch on each of the 4 walls. What happens next is fairly infamous. As he cautiously walks forward to figure out what the hell is going on, a wall of thread-thin, sharp wire flies through him. His body falls to many small pieces in the shape of the title after remaining still for a moment. It's not only jarring, but it sets up the rest of the film, where characters are tasked to find an escape route of booby-trapped rooms, all cubes housed within a larger cube. Makes you wonder why they titled it Cube, eh? That there's no explanation for their entrapment, some sort of twisted variation on the Stanford prison experiment, a perverse torture dome for billionaires, or even worse, only adds to the dread that's set in. 9. The Mist. After a jolting opening in which a tree crashes through the window of artist David Drayton, he is forced to go to the grocery store with his son and a contemptuous neighbor for supplies as a strange fog gathers over the lake. Within minutes of shopping, alarms ring and a man runs into the store in a panic, followed by a wave of the strange fog. Turns out there are creatures hidden through the fog, and it is not a fog at all, but a mist, which is much more menacing. Unspeakable, rarely fully revealed horrors then attack, resulting in the shoppers being trapped inside their store. The ultimate conflict in the film is a showdown between blind faith and human logic, giving it lovely Lovecraftian terror mixed into the outright sci-fi. And as much as the opening is a solid one for scares, it is the ending that will stick with you forever afterwards. 8. Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Invasion of the Body Snatchers is on the shortlist of films that can always be remade, its story repurposed to represent the social and political tones of the time. And with every generation since the 1956 adaptation, we have seen a new interpretation, each with a new setting. 1978, arguably the best, is easily the most frightening, and the opening scene less about abrupt shock or terror, but an atmosphere-setting, paranoid fever dream that only intensifies until the thrilling conclusion. As the credits roll, we witness the alien species, just globs of translucent gel floating through space, quietly invade San Francisco. They land on plant life and insidiously start to grow stems. Soon, a teacher on a field trip casually picks one up from a leaf. But the invasion, unbeknownst to her, has already begun. A nun walking past her gives her a knowing look, and a priest sits silently on a swing set, knowing and watching. Donald Sutherland's health inspector begins to health inspect the duplicate bodies later in the film, wandering through the crowded city as more and more faces watch him, the soundtrack pulsating like an alien heartbeat. 7. The Twilight Zone, the movie. The film adaptation of Rod Serling's A Twilight Zone is a series of vignettes, each handled by a different filmmaker. They all range in tone, from Joe Dante's cartoonish adaptation of It's a Good Life to Steven Spielberg's overly sentimental Kick the Can to the best, George Miller's version of the famous William Shatner starring episode Nightmare at 20,000 Feet. But each individual short mostly held their own well, and the cold open is fantastic. It's unlikely anyone would expect Dan Aykroyd's name on a list like this, unless we're talking about Nothing But Trouble, but alas, he and comedian Albert Brooks are driving down a dark, winding road late at night. Brooks starts to play little games, speeding up and turning off the headlights, then he pulls over, Aykroyd asking him, "Want to see something really scary?" Turning his head away from the camera, he returns as a hideous monster, eating Brooks as the infamous narration begins and the titles roll. It's scary, it's funny, and it sets the perfect tone for a film that jumps from laughter to abject terror. 6. Quarantine. Though it's essentially a shot-for-shot remake of the Spanish-language film Rec, Quarantine still manages to pack a punch and changes its central story to one that leans far more heavily on science fiction trappings. While covering a night-in-the-life story of a local firefighting station, reporter Angela Vidal is thrust into the middle of a 911 call at a rundown apartment complex. All hell breaks loose. Soon, the survivors are locked in, surrounded by military officers ordered to shoot any who try to escape on sight as zombie-esque creatures tear through the tenements. The resulting movie and final reveal are some of the finest in horror movie history, even if they were taken straight from Rec, and still land as the most innovative take on the zombie genre you can get. Personally, I still prefer the Spanish original and would recommend that one over this one, but I guess Quarantine does deserve a bone thrown to it every now and then. 5. Mimic. Despite Del Toro's best efforts for his first English-language movie, it is sadly a fairly derivative, standard monster movie script with little innovation thanks to studio interference. That doesn't mean it's bad though, and the plot is at least somewhat intriguing. After a brief introduction explaining a new virus is being spread by cockroaches, killing children en masse, entomologist Susan Tyler finds a solution: starve them to death. The cockroaches, not the children. 3 years later, however, the new species of cockroach has, as Jeff Goldblum says, found a way, using its ability to mimic its prey, in this case appearing like a figure in a trench coat before attacking. They are enormous, wreaking havoc in the New York subway. It's to Del Toro's credit that the film is scary at all, never more than during the opening attack on an unwitting priest. He's suddenly snatched away by an unknown assailant, the only witness a child who can't express what happened verbally. Oh, it's very scary. 4. RE-ANIMATOR. Originally, Herbert West of RE-ANIMATOR was meant as a parody, but thankfully director Stuart Gordon was in on the joke, adapting Lovecraft's creation into a darkly funny sci-fi horror film. Most of it is tongue-in-cheek with over-the-top violence, and star Jeffrey Combs has since become a quirky icon for horror aficionados. That said, the opening scene is no joke. It lets viewers know two things. First, this is going to be a violent ride, and second, it's probably going to push a few boundaries. The film begins at the University Zurich, a man in a lab coat screaming in agony. As authorities burst in the locked office door, the doctor's blood-covered face spasms, his eyes bulging before exploding out of his head. "You killed him," a nurse says. "No," replies West. "I gave him life." Cue the rip-off of the Psycho theme and cue one of the most entertaining horror films of the decade. 3. The Void. 2016's The Void is a peculiar entry here, with great creature effects that were largely crowdfunded by Indiegogo and a small budget and release. It received critical acclaim, and any fans of 80s horror were awash with joy at something new but still familiar that was finally in theaters again. Like the best sci-fi horror with Lovecraftian elements, The Void throws its audience into the unknown almost instantaneously. Two people flee a farmhouse, with one escaping, the other shot and doused in gasoline, and then is burned alive. The survivor is rushed to a nearby hospital run by a skeleton crew of nurses and a few doctors, only to learn quickly that they're surrounded by robed members of a cult determined to keep them inside. It isn't long into the film before a nurse is in a trance, brutally murdering a patient, her face flayed of flesh. Tentacles grow, bodies are mutilated and transformed, and answers are vague at best. But it's the kind of nostalgic throwback audiences were craving. 2. From Beyond. From Beyond, Gordon's second and not final foray into Lovecraft's back catalogue, is very much the opposite of his comical RE-ANIMATOR. It takes the science and thematic terror much more seriously. Combs returns, this time as Dr. Crawford Tillinghast, who along with partner Dr. Pretorius have invented the Resonator, a device that allows the mind to see beyond what it can normally perceive by activating the pineal gland. Within moments of turning it on, strange interdimensional beings float in the view of the doctors. They immediately turn aggressive and take bites out of the scientists. Tillinghast is locked up in a mental institution after Pretorius is found decapitated, but psychologist Catherine starts to find his outrageous story credible after a CT scan reveals his pineal gland is enlarged. The opening kill scene is hectic and nausea-inducing enough though, and things only get worse from there. 1. Scanners. There's no way that a Scariest science fiction opening list can be made without the movie that will quite literally blow your mind. Scanners is David Cronenberg's masterwork that sees a group of people with telepathic and telekinetic powers attempt to be utilized for military prowess by concept, only for a rogue faction of said scanners to revolt. The opening sees a weapons group attempt to demonstrate the usefulness of scanner abilities to a crowd, of which they select a volunteer from. It's only when the military scanner attempts to use his powers that it's revealed the volunteer is a far more powerful scanner himself, causing the ConSec employee's head to pop like a ripe melon across the stage and set the scene for another of Cronenberg's wondrous body horror spectacles. Yes, this is what we came for. And that's our list. What other terrifying science fiction openers should be up here? Share your thoughts in the comment section below.